Well, welcome again, and thank you very much for coming. Those of you who have come because you have to, and those of you who have come because you want to, we welcome you both. This is another in our speakers series, which periodically happens through the year. And because it's February and we're observing Black History Month, that's part of the reason for our gathering today. As usual, I want to thank the library and the library staff for their assistance in getting us up and mobile and allowing us to invade their space. If you'll just allow me a second, I want to tell a quick story as a means of introduction. And some of you may have heard this story before, but I think it really relates to today. Many years ago, my father was driving the family car. He and my mother and my sister and I, we were driving. At that time, they were living in California. My father suddenly realized that the person in the vehicle following us was honking his horn. Well, my father was driving at the speed limit, so he didn't figure that the person was honking the horn because he was traveling either too quickly or too slowly. And so he ignored the guy honking the horn. The honking persisted, and then my dad let the guy pass. The driver was an African American, and as he passed, the black man in the driver's seat pointed down to the sticker that my father had many years before affixed to the bumper of our family car. The black man, a total stranger, gave my dad a thumbs-up sign and a big smile, and my dad reminded me that the bumper sticker said, "Good neighbors come in all colors." I had forgotten it was there, and he had forgotten it was there on the car. I don't tell that story either to aggrandize my father's sense of cultural diversity and harmony, although he believed in it to his very core, to his very dying day. Nor do I tell the story to trivialize what our guest speaker today has to say. But I offer it as a means of suggesting from my research that writer, broadcaster, and community activist Saada Branker has, in her own way, attempted to build neighborhoods where diversity is truly encouraged and embraced. I'm sure that Ms. Branker's life and career paths, if you've done a little bit of research, you'll note that they have not been without setback, as she encourages Torontonians to recognize and embrace neighbors of all colors. But she appears to have worked diligently in that area and had great success thus far. When I explored her career points in her bio, I came across a quote from her My Urban Profile page. It said that she is quoted as saying, "I'm keen about international relations. I love putting the spotlight on people who ride life as well as those who get run over by it." Saada Branker studied at both Ryerson and Concordia in Toronto and Montreal in the 90s. She earned degrees in journalism and political science. She then wrote for the Toronto Sun, CBC Newsworld, Word Magazine, and Sway Magazine, among other media outlets. Her specialties were, at that time, business writing, coverage of health, media, and social issues, and human interest features. But amid her freelance writing, Saada also found time to work with the Parkdale Community Legal Services, assisting Toronto residents in housing, social assistance, employment, and immigration. She's also quoted as saying, "I write, can hold a child's attention, and I listen, and those are three of the toughest skills to sharpen." Let's welcome writer and professional peer and good neighbor, Saada Branker.
Thank you very much. This is an absolute pleasure being here. So as I'm about to get started, I'm just going to get you guys who have notepads, or if you're able to, before we get started, can you write just the top three of the most noticeable things you've seen about the evolution of Black History Month as it's been celebrated over the years? Three of the most noticeable changes about Black History Month. If you can't think of anything that has changed about Black History Month, then that's fine. That's fine. But anything that you think has changed. As well, can you write as well three of the most, to you personally, annoying things about Black History Month? And I'd like you to be honest about it, because I have my share as well. But three of the most annoying things to you. And I know I'm speaking to my journalism peers as I look at this group, and it kind of makes me think of when I was started at Ryerson. Just a bit of background. I am from Montreal. I was born and raised in Montreal. And I went to Concordia University. And I first entered economics as my program, my major. Did not like it, flunked out, never told anybody I was flunking out until my GPA was so low that when I thought I could sneak in to get my transcript, I was told, you failed and cannot reapply again for another 5 years. Your GPA is that low. At that time, I was so involved in a lot of political activities going on in the city that I just wasn't showing up for class. I thought if I see another diagram about demand and supply, that's it. I'm more interested in people and how people interact and power and politics. And I had no idea that this was in me. I also enjoyed writing. I was writing for my community paper called Community Contact, Montreal's Community Contact. It's still around. It was established in 1991, and it is the only English-speaking Caribbean-based newspaper serving the English-speaking community in Montreal. I started out writing book reports, and my activism was all enrolled in that. So after failing economics, I realized that I had to come to terms and be honest about what it was I wanted to do. Realizing that journalism was where I was going. From the time I was young, I was always writing. Moving to this city was quite a culture shock for me. Quite a culture shock. Fast pace, everybody, hi, how you doing, what do you do, was the first question. I'm just not used to that in Montreal. But the journalism program at Ryerson was, in a sense, my awakening to the diversity in writing. Diversity is something that was nothing that infiltrated my thinking until, I have to say, probably one time in class, in university actually, back at Concordia. In English class, it was the great novels class. And we had, our assignment was to pick one of the novels from the reading list and to do a paper on it. I looked through it and I said, I would really love to do Color Purple. This isn't on the list. Is it okay if I grab Alice Walker's book, The Color Purple, and I review this? And the professor, she told me, well, no. When I asked why, she said, well, I haven't read it, and it's not on the list. So we kind of clashed a bit on that, and I knew right away I was getting a C in that class. But we kind of clashed on that, but I was able to impress upon her that it was important that we don't have the same standard voices on the reading list. Not that there was anything wrong with John Steinbeck. I liked the Grapes of Wrath, but at the same time, it was disheartening for me to see that I don't see myself represented. I don't see any other groups represented. I would love to read about a South Asian experience or an Asian experience, but it's not here. She probably didn't appreciate that I was speaking out in that way in the class, which was what I often did. To fast forward, when I started taking my journalism program, I was admitted into the 2-year program for graduates. And there were 60 of us in the program, and there was only one other black woman in the class. We became friends. When you come from someone like my background, you notice these things. And you will always have other people tell you sometimes that, why do you notice these things? I'm colorblind. These things are not relevant. It doesn't matter whether you're black, purple, green, it doesn't matter, you know. But it did matter. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging that we're different at the same time as acknowledging the things that are similar. And so being in this particular program was very important to me because I realized I was mixing with a diverse group of students, older and younger. The oldest person in our class was a woman, a retiree. She had retired years ago and had decided she was going to pursue her first love, and that was journalism. There was another man in the class who used to be a lawyer until his phone stopped ringing, and he decided that he was going to pursue his first love, which was journalism. Then there was me. And I was very, very self-conscious about allowing anybody to read what I wrote. I don't know why, because I came from a background of writing for a community paper. But for some reason, it felt like that was my block. That was my little block that I lived on. But at the same time, I couldn't get used to the idea that I had to share my voice with anybody. How I broke out of that was simply, the wonderful thing about journalism are the assignments, and how quick you have to turn everything in, and how you'd have these, I had a particular class, newsprint, that ran for the entire day, from 9 in the morning till 5 o'clock in the evening. It was just like being in a newsroom. You'd walk in, you'd go to the wall and you see what your assignment was that day, and you had the rest of the day to get your assignment in order, start writing it by about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it had to be submitted by 5 o'clock as if you were submitting that to an editor. That's a deadline. If you got anywhere past 5 o'clock, forget it. So that kind of trained you, but I was still not comfortable with people reading what I had to say. Eventually it happened, you know, and so this is something that I don't know it exactly. Everybody's probably at different levels in this particular group here in terms of your aspirations for journalism, but it is really important, I realize, the community writing. And when I say community, it's not just Black community. Any sort of association you have or any sort of affinity you have is most probably your community. So let me just get started. Poyce is my lovely assistant who's taking the photographs. I call this diversity girl. I am so not the diversity girl, but I was coined this at the Toronto Sun by one of my fellow workers. At Ryerson, you're able to do an internship, and you were responsible for choosing where you would like to do your internship. This was back in 1998. It might have changed to a certain degree now. And so there were only 2 dailies available on our list. One was the Toronto Sun, and I don't even know what the second one was. A couple of us were managed to get in at the Toronto Sun. I was one. And so I'll tell you, when I walked in that newsroom, first of all, when I first moved here, my friend said to me, there are a few newspapers here, but you do not want to bring home the Toronto Sun. And I said, why? They said, we got 2 words for you, Christy Blatchford. And I said, well, what? At that point, there was such a tumultuous relationship between the Black community in Toronto after the Just Desserts and some shootings, police shootings of Black youth, and Christy Blatchford, who's a very talented, skilled writer, made known her opinions, but she also reported. And there was just a real serious bias on the part of, at least I must say, my own community against, in terms of friends, against Christy Blatchford at the time. What a relief it was to actually meet this woman in the newsroom and to realize she's a real person. She's mad talented. She knows her stuff. She was very receptive to speaking to me, even about my opinions of Just Desserts. And being in that newsroom was an awakening, because I was able to see, if you ever make it to a daily newsroom, which I'm sure most of you will, it's to see how things work and how they get in gear every morning. Being in that newsroom was helpful. At the same time, every time I looked at somebody, I felt like people looked at me and they were looking away. I'd look up and people would look away. No one came over to say anything to me. I was clearly the only person who looked like me in the newsroom. But people were kind enough. The best thing to do when you're in a newsroom is to find somebody and shadow that person. Ask anybody, any reporter, is it possible for me to spend time with you this afternoon on your assignment? Just follow that person. My very first assignment was actually going out to Hamilton to, I actually went with Brad Honeywell. And it was a case of a man who was suspected of abducting a young girl in the middle of the day, picked up this little girl, disappeared with her. In a matter of hours, everybody was looking for her, and they found her in the shed, partially clothed, and they found him. He was arrested. So we were showing up to his preliminary hearing. And so I was able to sit and watch how Brad Honeywell conducted his business, but also to sort of ask him questions and to receive questions coming back. And that was wonderful, because I was able to sort of stick with him. And we'd had some discussions about the relationship between the Black community in Toronto, the Black communities in Toronto, because it's not homogenous, it's several communities. And we had this discussion about the perception between the Toronto Sun and the communities in the Toronto Sun. It was an awakening, some of the things he said. Some of the things he said kind of confirmed my thinking about the Sun. But the experience was very important, because you learn how to work in a newsroom. You know how to put your stories together. You learn how you're going to sit down and work with an editor who's going to probably read out almost everything you write and explain things. Very simple thing I always remembered, you don't use words like received. It's she got her letter on this particular day, I wrote, she received. I was very formal in my writing. And I had a lot of people like telling me, not dumb it down, but simplify it. Simplify your writing, as you would speak to someone who's a friend. That seemed to be the hardest thing for me. I never realized how anal I was in my writing. So poise, if you'd be able to, thanks. I have enough pictures now? So what happened was after the Sun, the experience was 6 weeks at the Toronto Sun. And that was very helpful. The other thing to learn is when you are reporting on anyone or anything and you quote anybody, make sure you get the spelling of their name correct. Don't guess. Don't just gloss over it quickly. It's best if I ask you, hi, what's your name?
Octavian.
Pardon me?
Octavian.
Octavian? How do you spell that?
O-C-T-V-I-A-N.
Okay. How do you spell it? O-C-T-A-V-I-A-N? Okay. And so I had to learn the hard way how to do that, especially when I came across somebody whose name was Siobhan, and I thought, I'll spell it the way I think it sounds. And my professor reminded me that to get someone's name wrong in an assignment is an automatic F. You can't do that for an article, so it puts it in your mind. They're the simple things, but it's absolutely disrespectful to take someone's time and ask someone for an interview, and then you go and get their name spelt wrong. So I learned things like that in the newsroom.
Honest, I didn't put her up to this.
So you might have heard this already. It's very important. Can you move to the next? Thank you, Poise. This is my lovely friend, Poise Dewhurst, and I really appreciate his help, my lovely boyfriend. Okay, so I asked you about Black History Month. And this is sort of like an evolution for me. And I'm going to speed through it because I kind of came late. But my experience with Black History Month was that often growing up, and it must be the case for a lot of people who are not part of the African Canadian communities as well, is that Black History Month is almost synonymous with African American history. And so we know about the Malcolm X's and the Martin Luther Kings, but when you kind of have to think about, well, who were the history makers in Canada? Either we don't care, we don't know, we don't have enough information. And so that's also it's kind of sad. So it got to the point where eventually you kind of have to learn this on your own, or today now there's no excuse, you can look this up. But a couple of names that come to mind that I do want you to try to look up. Marie-Joseph Angelique. Marie-Joseph Angelique. So it's Mary, M-A-R-I-E, hyphen, Joseph, J as in Jack, O, S as in Saada, E-P-H, Marie-Joseph Angelique. So it's A-N as in Nancy, G-E-L-I-Q-U-E. I think you're just going to be hearing more about Marie-Joseph Angelique. She was a woman who in, I think it was the late 1800s, in old Montreal, she was owned by someone. She was actually one of the first few documented slaves, because a lot of people like to say there were no slaves in Canada. But Marie-Joseph Angelique, in a bid to sort of to gain her freedom, was also in love and did not want to be a slave anymore. And in her bid, she set a fire that caught and blazed through old Montreal at the time. And it burned down several buildings. And she was punished for this publicly. She was killed. Marie-Joseph Angelique, her story is only beginning to emerge now, and there are people, wonderful people in the community like Dr. Afua Cooper, who's dedicated a lot of time in terms of writing about Marie-Joseph Angelique. But those are that's just an example of the history that I started to learn. But moving on, I remember at Concordia, we had an organization, the Caribbean Students Union, which was invited one day by the Concordia Link, which is a student newspaper which still exists, to please come up, and we would like to get as many writers participate for Black History, the Black History Month supplement. We thought this is great, and members of our organization, they were encouraging us, we really need to get a diversity of voices in the Concordia Link. You don't normally see that. We went up there and we had this meeting. We sat around, and the editors, really keen, dedicated editors, young editors, I remember, we're looking through, okay, what are some of the story ideas? And one after another, the story ideas were linked to, well, there's a protest, an anti-racism protest, there's a demonstration, anti-racism demonstration, there's some readings by some revolutionary writers, and somebody had to make the point Black History Month isn't about racism. Black History Month is about so much more than racism. That is a very small part of what we celebrate in that month. And in fact, we don't just celebrate the month, it's something that you celebrate throughout the year. So it was that type of schooling, which not even just, I have to say, not even just the white students in the class, in the room. It was including the other black students who were thinking, oh, that's right, it's not about racism. And so when I think about that, yes?
I was just going to note there's a book called Who's Who in Black History. That's,
Who's?
It sort of has little blurbs on
Yes. I saw you reading.
Canadians, Black Canadians.
What was that? It has
It has
blurbs.
little blurbs. It's sort of like an encyclopedia.
Of Who's Who in Black, yes. So the information is available. Who's Who in Canada, as opposed to looking at African American history. But that experience at the Concordia Link taught me that, again, diversity of voices is very important. As well as we're not simply honoring the dead. Dr. Charles Drew was someone who discovered an important component of the blood plasma, and he ironically died in a car accident when he was unable to get treatment at a hospital because of the color of his skin. This is a man who attended McGill University. And so this type of information wasn't, it's available, but at the same time it was about people who are no longer with us. So we eventually evolved, I find, in Black History Month to celebrating people who are still with us. And that kind of I'm starting to see in the media today. So with your notes, if you can, if anybody can sort of brainstorm, can you just name some of the, excuse me, media outlets that have celebrated or taken note of Black History Month? Does anything come to mind? Thank you. Would you open it, please, for me? Oops, sorry. Yes, just, pardon me? BET, Black Entity, yes, that's right. 93.5, Flow, that's right, Black History Month. Thank you very much. Yes.
Global News has done features on it.
Absolutely, Global News. I'm thinking CBC, CTV, the Canadian Film Centre. Recently, Poyce and I were able to attend. It was a discussion between Norman Jewison and Lee Daniels, the director of Precious, with Clement Virgo, who is one of our leading filmmakers in Canada, who is about to embark on an ambitious project. He's going to adapt Lawrence Hill's Book of Negroes into a film. And that was very interesting in itself. But almost, I'm noticing there's so many, there's just so much talk of Black History Month now in February. This didn't exist a few years ago, particularly media outlets. It wasn't something that existed. I eventually got a job at CBC Newsworld, and how that happened was after I graduated from Ryerson. It was just a few months of total angst. I didn't know what I was going to do. Everybody else seemed to have an intern or a job lined up, and I was devastated because I didn't know where I was going to go. I was still writing for Word magazine, which is an urban culture magazine in Toronto, and I was doing it just to get experience. And that's something I advise, again, if you can get that experience writing anywhere, do it. I was getting paid not a lot of money, but it helped to get my name out. And I was a nobody in the city as well, having moved from Montreal. The first assignment was, they called me and they asked me, we would like you to do a feature on the lack of people of color in broadcast media, television, particularly newsrooms. So for that, if you can go forward, for that I was able to think about it some more. Let me see, I have to backtrack, I'm sorry. This one, you can leave it right here. No, you could go back to that. The very first assignment I was given in Montreal was on November 11th, 1995. Sorry that I have to backtrack, but this is important in terms of what helped me to decide how to write stories. I was asked, Branker, I need you to do a story on Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was killed yesterday. Ken Saro-Wiwa, it was the Nigerian, what they call dissident. He was of the Ogoni people in Nigeria that was in the Niger Delta. They had some serious issues with how the government was handling the oil that was available, that was being taken from their land. And the people who were living there were not able to reap any of the benefits of this oil. It was, of course, exported to the other foreign countries, the United States. And so Ken Saro-Wiwa, along with other people, was making, had actually for years taken a stake in this to try to raise awareness, but also to try to show them that the Ogoni people deserved much better. And for that he was punished, and for that he was punished, and for that he was punished. Eventually he and about some other dissidents were hanged. They were killed. So that was on November 10th, 1995. I was asked to write this piece. The editor at the paper said, well, you know, we don't have much time, so just grab the Montreal Gazette, read the story, and paraphrase it. And I thought, wow, really? For real? And I'd never written a story before. I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to see if I can find some Nigerian Canadians. Let's see if I can find some Nigerians in Montreal who must have opinion about this. And that was so easy. So I remember one woman in particular, Choice Okoro, who used to be a journalist in Nigeria, and she fled to Canada. And I was able to find her through just looking her up. And she talked about her experience meeting Ken Saro-Wiwa and how upset she was over his death. To be able to include a voice like that in a story when you could simply paraphrase it, was just wonderful. It was not a well-written story, but it got the bug going for me. So if you can flip. So to fast forward to the assignment then for Word magazine, they asked me to do a piece on the lack of people of color in newsrooms, and I called it The Invisible Visible Minorities in Broadcast News. That piece... Sure, you can go through. You can go again, because I'm going to go back to that. Keep going. Down there. Thank you. That was the piece for Word magazine. That's Cassandra Wilson, a singer on the cover. But one thing I learned, I was able to get a few people. Again, whenever you do a story, it's always a question of how many people can I get on this story who can give me a different opinion. But I was still a little editorializing a bit on that one when I think about it. But that piece, I was able to get Tony Berman, who was the head of CBC Newsworld at the time. I had no idea how difficult it was to get this man. I called him. Tony Berman, if you don't know, he is now head of programming, and I don't know the official title. I should have checked this before I got here. He's the head of programming at Al Jazeera. He left Newsworld, disappeared for a little bit, and then appeared at Al Jazeera. Probably doing remarkable work as he did at Newsworld. This man accepted my my request for an interview. I went to his office, and in sitting with him and talking to him, he explained that Newsworld was interested in bringing in a diversity of voices, and when people think diversity of voices, it's not just people of color. He was talking about people of different abilities, younger people, people of different backgrounds. They wanted to get a diversity of voices in the newsroom because CBC was seen as Mother Core, which was just older white men reporting the news. So from that point on, I was able to put that on record. Did a story. He called me a few days later and said, you know, your story was very fair. And I mentioned that I was looking for work. I mentioned that I was a student who had not started working yet. I was still doing a little bit of reporting for The Sun, but it wasn't, at $18 an hour, it was helpful, but it wasn't anything that I could build a career on. And so within a couple of days, I received this writing test in the mail. And I had to apply like everybody else. Do you guys want to know what the job interview was like? Yeah? Okay. I walked in there, and there were a few other people there. They give you a writing test. That's very important. Hence, if you're in journalism, if you are not confident about your writing, find a way to just keep writing, because if you're able to write, if you're comfortable writing, you'll probably be able to shift shape into different streams. And that's broadcast, that's writing online, that's writing for magazines, and that's also reporting. And if you're a good writer, you kind of have that set, even radio documentaries. If your writing is poor, but you want to get on camera, that's fine, but you're going to always struggle. So always work on the writing. The interview itself was, at the time, I thought it was kind of easy. It was a lot of English grammar, and as well, questions when I went in for the job interview. The first question, I think, was, how would you line up the news today? And at the time, I remember it was a budget day, so I knew that was easy. But I knew this going in, think about the top 5 stories. And either do it exactly like all the other broadcasters, how they would do it, or be different. And say, I'm actually for the 3rd story in the evening, and think of something different and explain, be prepared to do that. The question I was asked was, what book are you reading right now? And so you have to be aware of the news that day, but you also have to have some sort of idea of how you would like the news to be told. How you would line it up is important, but also being able to write that writing test is crucial as well. So I managed to get an interview, and when people came to meet me to say, we want to meet the woman who was able to get an interview with Tony Berman, then they realized, oh, you have no experience. Okay, so I was offered a program assistant position at $11 an hour. At the same time, I was also offered a position for a 1-year internship at the Toronto Star for 1 year at $18 an hour. I decided on CBC Newsworld only because I felt, and this is no way, it's not a reflection on me, but I felt that Newsworld could do better with me being there than the Toronto Star. I felt looking at the newsroom at Newsworld, I just felt we need to see more representation. I need to learn how to be here. I need to learn how to work in a newsroom and work from program assistant, which was basically just running around with scripts and passing them to people and answering phones. And it was tedious work, but I loved it. The 3rd day on my job, the Swissair flight disaster occurred. That was when a Swissair flight went down near Peggy's Cove, and about 222 people perished. Not one body was found intact, or maybe there was one, but it was devastating. But I remember being upstairs rolling teleprompter, and we saw the wires flashing. Plane goes down, and each second the news just keeps getting updated. Plane goes down, 200 people might be dead, plane goes, and it just kept going on. And by the time I got into the newsroom, went downstairs, people were in high gear. People passed me telephone books and said, here, this telephone book for Nova Scotia, look through it, just find a name, call somebody, and ask them if they heard anything. It was amazing how they were just thinking, do anything. They needed to get people to report, to give ideas, to tell us what was happening. And we needed them to be our eyes. And so it was really exhilarating. I had to look up information on the type of plane it was, and that's the time when you think. That's the time. If you have any ideas, throw them out there, because they can use that probably. It was 3 hours we were on the air live. And they were just trying to find people on the air and put them on the air live, is what you see now. Everything is all about going live. After that experience, by the time I got home, I had to remember that 222 people died. I was like, wow, what a great night. This is great. But people died. And that's the thing about how it sinks in after. It really does sink in after. What's important is you get the job done. The Newsworld experience lasted 3 years. I went from program assistant to associate producer. Associate producer, you're handling script, but you're also now contributing to a show. And that was in business, and that was fabulous. We were able to sit in story meetings, and I was actually part of, and this is what I always wanted to do. I wasn't interested in being on camera. I was interested in being part of the decision making. Why? Because I didn't see a diversity of voices. That was about 3 years. Yeah, it was 3 years I was there. Fabulous work, but eventually, at the same time, what I was doing was hiding the fact that I was struggling with a childhood disease I've had since I was 11, rheumatoid arthritis, which affected all my joints, and I was just getting weaker and weaker, and going into the bathroom to hide the fact that I couldn't put my jacket on. And not really recognizing that is another part of what makes me diverse. Just trying to hide it because I wanted to be like everybody else. What happened was eventually one morning I couldn't raise my arms. My shoulders were so badly deteriorated I realized I needed surgery. So I told CBC Newsworld I would be leaving and I'd come back. But by the time I had my shoulder replaced, but by the time I came back, the program I worked on was gone. So it was then again back into okay, what am I going to be doing? By 2005, that was 2001, I did some work at CBC Newsworld, went back and forth, did a bit of contract stuff. But by the time I was 2005, I decided I would freelance. And that's a whole other experience, freelancing. You're basically taking everything you know, and you're going to now focus on pitching story ideas and writing for publications, submitting your work where it's requested or where you're able to convince people to use your work. You have to be become very familiar with the audiences you want to target. Have any of you practiced writing query letters?
I promised them a 2-hour lecture shortly. We might do that this week.
Oh, that's going to be fabulous. Query letters are pitches. It's please let me write for your magazine. Please let me write for your newspaper. I have this great idea. It's great when you learn the formula for writing a query letter. So pay close attention because it is almost formulaic. And so you, in a sense, you can't go wrong after you practice and you practice. The whole point of the query letter is to try to convince an editor to accept your story idea and to run it in the next issue or in a future issue, and to introduce yourself to this editor and try to establish a relationship. It's wonderful when you have editors who can accept your work and give you feedback. That's really crucial because it's the best way to sharpen your skills. And with that, it's the freelancing life is a bit more isolated. You're not out there like in a newsroom every single day, but you have the freedom of choosing the stories you want to work on. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples, but first, before I get there, Black History Month. What are the 3 things you've noticed about its evolution? Does anybody want to share that? Sure.
Well, since Barack Obama got elected to presidency,
Yeah.
we're seeing a lot more awareness on Black history in the media.
Absolutely. Isn't that phenomenal? Just in terms of when he made that speech on race relations in America, it almost felt as if the rest of the world was like, whew, especially the United States. The Americans were, whew, now we can talk about race in media. That's a very good example. Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry to say, but I feel it's a lot more permanent now. I remember in elementary school it was like a poster on the wall, and now
Right.
Younger, and I grew up in Kingston, so
Oh, yeah.
I didn't really hear about it until I came to Toronto, and so I don't know if it's something that.
What do you remember how you felt when you first heard about it? How did you feel?
To be honest, the first time I heard about it was when I was walking down Bloor Street, and there were these guys that would always stand outside the subway trying to sell Black History Month information packets to
Yes.
people. And I stopped and talked to them once the first time, so like, oh, sure, I'll talk to him, and then I realized he was trying to get money from me, and then I would just blow by him every day, and like he was always there, and that was honestly the first time.
That was your first time.
And this is my first Black History Month event.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, way in the back.
I actually sort of had the opposite experience. Like the school that I went to was sort of predominantly black school.
Yeah.
And we did like a big deal. We had like plays, and they did big, like African drumming things, and like it was really cool. Like they really celebrated the whole month. Like every week of the whole month, they would have like an assembly, and we would have a big 2-hour display of something. Someone would come in, someone would talk, and be a dance, or it was really cool. So I kind of always grew up knowing about it.
So, see, that's a range of experiences. All of your experiences weigh heavy. I mean, these are good experiences. If you were to ever even personalize that and to write about it, it's interesting because it's someone else's story. Like, I can't fathom what it's like to not know about it, right? To not experience it. It's what I know. It's what we did. But at the same time, there are all sorts of things that I can't fathom, like other celebrations, other ethnic celebrations. My friend always makes the remark, there are no Asian people, there are no South Asian people in the United States, based on what you see on television, based on the commercials, right? It's like, talk about invisible minorities. And he said, you're right. The idea is it's black and white in the United States. It's black and white. It's black and maybe brown, Latinos, particularly a lot of browns, Latinos. But at the same time, where are the Asians? And so being in Montreal, I was really comforted by the fact that there is such a representation of people according not just languages, but also different backgrounds. But it's not represented in media, which was mind-boggling. It's not represented in media. You would just look at the masthead, or you look at contributors to a magazine or to newspaper, and you're like, wow. None of it, like age is not represented, color, ethnic background, maybe. But it was kind of made you wonder. But here's the question. Do you think it's more important to have diversity in the newsroom or have diversity in reporting? Diversity in the newsroom or diversity in reporting? Which, if you were an editor, imagine you're an editor and you were given the charge of, okay, we want to sort of, we want to update our newsroom. What do you think?
I'd say it's like more important to have diversity in reporting because
Yes.
if there are no diversity
Mm-hmm.
But the product that they put out doesn't necessarily have to be diverse. So
That's right.
what they're reporting and what they're saying has to be more diverse because like it's actual facts coming out of their mouth. You can get anybody a piece of paper, but what the product is like, it's still gonna come out whether it's from a white person's book or a black person's book. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I agree. I concur. Yes, what do you think?
It's a sort of continuation of that. It's more, you're addressing a much larger audience. You're addressing the public here.
Yes.
So you need diversity. You need to understand all of it.
Did you guys hear that? That's a really good point. You're addressing a much larger audience, and so it's and that's true. And so it's crucial that you do that. Thank you. Thanks.
I think it's just so important with the newsroom, or just because, like, if you don't have that diversity there, those ideas may never get actually like brought to the table. Like, if there's not such, if it's all just white people and they want to talk about one issue about color, well, it might be completely different than what somebody who of color would be in the room saying. Well, maybe we should focus on this because it's never actually talked about. Because the people of the other color wouldn't really understand or recognize that because they're obviously might just not be aware of that situation. So I guess having a diverse newsroom would bring out more ideas that people aren't aware about, and then that would just go straight to reporting.
I concur with that too, because I believe that both. I kind of made it appear like a trick question, but it's both. Go ahead. Thank you.
I was just going to say, I think there needs to be a balance. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you definitely need the diversity in the reporting itself, so you're not constantly having sort of one perspective on any given issue, right? As well as having diversity in the newsroom, so you do have that sort of collection of ideas in one place, and you can actually go to different people to look at different subjects, and or you can have, you know, multiple people looking at one subject, and then different points of views all sort of working in tandem.
Absolutely. Thank you. And especially with the multimedia platforms that we have now, I mean, in social networking, internet access, wireless access, we really have no excuse for not having a diversity of voices. You know, we really don't. It's as simple as going on Twitter and just putting out 140 characters asking for someone who has knowledge of some particular event and try to get in touch with that person, or putting your pitch out on Facebook inconspicuously because you don't want your rivals to see that. But, you know, to try to get the word out, to find someone else to contribute to a story. Now, let me make clear that diversity runs in so many different directions. It's not something about we have to include. It's about inclusion. It's always about inclusion. It's never, diversity isn't about racism. It's not about affirmative action. It's about including, and it's including all the different components that can make your story. And so it runs in so many different directions. So a lot of, let me give examples. So a lot of, I could say, ethnic or black publications are guilty of doing the same thing. There's no diversity of voice in some of the publications because you're kind of used to the same types of stories. But it's actually, we're doing ourselves a disservice when we, the expression is, can't get off our block. If you can't get off your block and travel somewhere else, you know, and so it's advantageous to show the humanity in our stories by showing like everybody has these commonalities. But at the same time, it's almost like it took Barack Obama, you know, to sort of get people like in gear and talking about race issues. And it's such an uncomfortable issue. And if you want to see how uncomfortable it is, you must know this. Go onto the Toronto Star website. Look up any of their series, the racial profiling series that ran recently, or even the one that ran October 2002. That was the one that really got people up in arms. And then look at comments. When you look at people's comments, the people who are hidden and can write their comments in response to a story, particularly if it involves diversity, racism, I don't know about you, but I feel, I'm not representing anyone else, I feel that there's this exasperation, a frustration on the part of these people who submit their comments, some of them, because they don't want to hear about it. They think that diversity is somehow an attack on them. They think anything that is pro-black or pro-inclusive is somehow anti-white. Or anti-whatever their point of view is. And so sometimes it could be you kind of have to brace yourself because you can get upset reading some of the comments. There's sometimes it's representative of the people out there, and I'm not even going to be saying anything belligerent about anybody, but that's important. It gives me a sense of when I'm writing a story of what's out there and about the audience. Does anybody, first I'm going to throw up questions, does anyone have questions about any of the work I've done, because I could talk about particular stories, but I thought I don't want to bore you with that. I really like the points of views. Go ahead.
Chris, let me get these on mic
that'd
so
be
that we
great.
actually get them on tape too. Okay.
And can you flag
I'll
me,
be
Ted, when I'm too long, when we have about 10 minutes to go?
Let's go about 10:30. See the clock at the back of the room.
Okay. Wonderful. Let me see.
Oh, right there.
Oh, that back of the room. Okay, yes, thank you. Great, we've got 15 minutes.
Sorry, Chris.
Chris Ali Trotman, Centennial College journalism program. I just wanted to know if you could give us any examples of any discrimination you have faced, like while trying to become a journalist.
Yes. Isn't that sad? Yes. When I was at the Toronto Sun, I was, as I said, I was, one of a few. A couple of instances come to mind. And I bet you the people at the Sun don't even remember me. There was a situation, it was a story of a woman who had put her children in a taxi cab to take them to their destination. She wasn't going with them. She asked the cab driver to take them somewhere. She wrote the address down. And what had happened was, we just got the tail end of it, was that this cab driver was driving around with these children, and somehow, you know how the word gets out, this woman had abandoned her children. This is a black woman, black children. And so the Sun, the editor, sent somebody out to report on this, to see what had happened. I was in the newsroom, and the reporter came back, and it was a case of the mother had inverted, like she changed the numbers. It was supposed to be 715 Avenue Road, and she wrote 751. It was a simple mistake, right? But what had happened was, it was a point of, people just thought it was funny in the newsroom. And one reporter was calling out to another, hey, so what happened? He said, oh yeah, she's as stupid as she was ugly, was what he said, yelled over people's heads to me. And on so many levels, that was offensive, right? I'm like, I'm a woman, I'm a black woman, and you're going to say that right over my head? And you never even said good morning to me, like my whole time while I'm working in your newsroom? So it left a bad taste in my mouth. Some people would tell me, oh, you don't have to, you shouldn't take it personally. How else should I take it, right? How else should I take it? There was another situation. I was speaking to the photo, the editorial director. I think he was the photo director, the photo editor, and I don't remember his name, and it's good I don't remember his name. He was friendly. He was very talented, and the Toronto Sun with the Sun Girls. And he was the person who was handled that aspect of the Toronto Sun. By the way, in the Caribbean, the newspapers have that often. I used to think, oh, it's only here that they have this disgusting, and then I saw the Trinidad Punch and other newspapers in the Caribbean, and like, oh, they all have Sun Girls. Okay. But this man and I were having this conversation, and here I am, a keener, trying to figure out how do I work myself into the newsroom? Maybe I want to work here. Like, this is great. I actually was one of the few students in my internship who actually had stories that were published. I had at least about 6 stories published, and they were all diversity stories. So I was thinking this is an opportunity. And speaking to the photo editor, he was very friendly. And then he turned around and he said, you should think about being one of the Sun Girls. And there was a moment, right? I blinked, and then I burst out laughing, and I kept laughing, and I walked away. And he didn't understand what it was, but I just thought, you can't be real, right? I'm here trying to get a job, and you're asking me if I want to put on a bikini. And the reason why, he said, was because we're trying to get more diversity, and we want to see diversity of Sun Girls. And Ray. And so, again, it wasn't a situation where I just felt like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lodge a complaint. I do not get that offended with racist comments, ignorant comments, because sometimes I feel people don't know better. It's better if I tell them than if I let them walk away not knowing better. But in this particular case, I was so offended, I just walked off. Someone else said to me in the newsroom, made a point, and this was again at the Sun, he believed that we were talking about the issues between the Sun and the black communities, and he believed that generally black people are less articulate. And those are his words, less articulate. And so I had to sit there and have a real conversation with him, because at first I thought, That's what I thought, right? And then the second thing I thought was, well, I'm just going to, what I'm going to do is just, talk to him and find out where he gets that idea. Because I don't know his experiences, and I don't want him to feel that his experiences aren't legitimate. But I do have to tell him that that's ignorant. Like, I do have to say something about that. Because you cannot judge an entire group of people based on your one or two experiences. And one more, at CBC Newsworld, it's incredible how often people will tell you, go for the drinks. Go for the drinks after work. Go for the drinks after work. And I don't drink alcohol. I didn't want to schmooze with anybody. I spent 8 hours with them. I thought, I'm done. But people would say, go for the drinks. And I understand now why. It's a very crucial part of networking. It's a crucial part of showing that you were part of the newsroom. It's a crucial part of just getting to know people and figuring out how things maneuver and how they work and the backroom dealings. And showing that you're just part of the team. So finally I said, okay, I'm going to go. Against my better judgment, I said, I'm going to go. And I went, and maybe it was the energy I was giving off. But here I was sitting there in having, my cranberry with people, and they were having discussions. And it was the wife of one of the broadcasters who came over to me, and she said, oh, I see you're having a good time. And we had a nice conversation. And when I told her I was from Montreal, she said, oh, I don't like Montreal. She said, she said, I love Montreal, but I don't like the Haitians in Montreal. And I balked at this. I said, excuse me? I thought, did I hear right? She said, I don't like the Haitians in Montreal. She says, I've had at least 2 experiences in a cab where the Haitian drivers were really offensive and they don't even speak proper French. And oh my gosh, it was a horrible experience. And at this point, I started to shake. I was so angry. And I said to her, by no means do your 2 experiences in a cab represent the entire Haitian community of Montreal. It's a diverse community, and there are a lot of wonderful, talented people in the community. I'm not even Haitian, but I kept thinking, how dare you think that I'm not Haitian, that you could say this to me? But she was the wife of a broadcaster, and she was an older woman, and she was, I don't think at all she thought that she was being offensive, because she actually argued the point with me. And that was my exit, right? And I left. Yes?
Braden Keddy, Centennial College Journalism.
Hi.
I was reading online some information about you, and it said that you were involved in some community work with a couple of ministries and agencies. If you if you wouldn't mind, what agencies were you involved with, and what prompted you to get involved with them?
That was my first few years in Montreal. When I got very involved in community activism. Concordia is a wonderful university when it comes to immersing you in real life, in the real life world. Concordia has a rich history from the Sir George Campus Affair of 1969, where there was this student activism, and a lot of Caribbean students were expelled from the country for taking part, to even Valerie Fabricant, who took a gun into the school and shot people over his dispute over the works that he had done that he claimed were plagiarized, that he said were plagiarized. It was one of the longest. It was a very strange, bizarre court case, too, that he was involved in. To even the moratorium that Concordia put together, or not even put together, they put together this, implemented a moratorium, I think. It was after Netanyahu arrived in Montreal. He was invited to speak, and it caused such an uproar because there's such activism amongst, in that Concordia community. I was going there at the same time. I'd applied for a job at the Quebec Ministries of Cultural Communities and Immigration, and that was as a stagiaire, an intern. This was before I actually got into real journalism. I was still writing community papers, but that was becoming familiar with communities, cultural communities in Montreal. I had to work in French, and that was a great experience. And it was great pay, but it was also great in immersing myself in various communities that were applying for funding. So it wasn't just black communities. It was the Portuguese community, the Italian communities, the Asian communities. It was wonderful. And that was for about almost a year. From there, I was also involved in other student organizations. One was a bit more radical, called AKAX, and that was to try to raise awareness about the plight of various black communities and the police shootings of black youth. There were quite a lot at a time in Montreal. And at one point, one of my proudest points was when my father came out with me to march to protest against the shooting of a young boy by a police officer. And we were out there losing our voices together. But that probably got me involved in the and then taking political science as well. Thanks. Any other questions?
Come on, you guys. What's the most important question that follows what she just said? Ryan?
I actually have a different question.
Okay. Go ahead, Ryan.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan Kavanaugh, Centennial College Journalism. I was just wondering, touching on acceptance of racial diversity in the media and in society in general.
Yeah.
What do you think it will take before, I guess, the media and society as a whole, the acceptance level gets to a point where Black History Month or Black history doesn't need a month to be, I guess, celebrated?
Good question. Maybe it can go back to some of the great points that you guys brought up. That's a good question. It's one that makes me think. It has to happen on a variety of levels, and that is inclusion in newsrooms of people of color, and also recognition of not just Black History Month, but other celebrations. But the recognition that Black history is part of world history, that nobody has their own history. You don't have a monopoly on history, and that it's important that we sort of unearth these experiences of people, the everyday people who contribute to history. Lincoln Alexander, for example, there's a great film, A Lincoln Time, that is worth seeing if you have an opportunity. But when you talk about Ontario politicians and people who broke ground, I mean, Lincoln Alexander is one. And so there's so many people, Senator Ann Cools, but I can name some of the Black ones that I know and the ones that I don't remember, but there's so many others. But I think inclusion in the newsroom, Ryan, as well as to also have diversity of reporting and different angles. It's so important to look for different angles. I'll just give you a quick example. One time I was, where was I? I met this young woman. Her name is Sarah, and she was really impressive, a teenager with a mohawk, and she had tattoos all over her body and rings everywhere, and she swore like a sailor. Or truck driver, all of the both together, and she was a real keener, and also top of her class. Was in a documentary where she talked about problems that she had in life. She'd attempted suicide, and she talked openly about cutting, self-mutilation, if you're familiar with that. There's the people who cut themselves as a way. It's a way. Ironically, it's a way to make them feel. They are so caught up and depressed in their feelings that sometimes the release of the cutting themselves actually creates this endorphins release. And it's something that I wasn't familiar with. But here Sarah was telling people about it, and I realized I want to do a story on this. And so I thought it's a different angle. And the first thing I did was I went online and I checked to see if I could find stories about cutting. Sarah's a white woman. And, I didn't even occur to me, I have to do a story about, no. I just thought this is a different story. And I didn't find any sort of reference to cutting online, which was remarkable. So it was like you're sitting on something you knew. And so I pitched it immediately to the Globe and Mail. And they got back to me a couple of days later. They said, we like this story. So it was just a matter of, I really had to force myself to think of a different angle. She was someone that was remarkable, and she was in a documentary, and I was going to write about the documentary. But then I decided, no, I want to write about teens who cut themselves. And that the Globe and Mail focus thought that that's a worthy story. So they worked with me, and I submitted a piece, and it was hardly ever doctored. They just changed the lead a bit. But Sarah was such a remarkable person, such that she kind of just told the story. And so that ran just fine. But I think it's important to have a diversity of ideas in the newsroom. In terms of Black History Month, people still think there's a tokenism with that. And it's unfortunate that they do think that, because really Black History Month is what you make it. It really is. And you can tell a diversity of stories in terms of Black history, not the everyday that everyday stuff, but find out about Blacks in other parts of the country or Blacks in other parts of the world, and in obscure places, because you'll always find. Ray Emery was a hockey player that I decided I wanted to do a piece on for Sway magazine, and he's now in Russia. Ray Emery is he was the goalie, former goalie for Ottawa Senators, And after he had a horrible season, he went to Russia. I'm waiting for him to come back to do a follow-up story, because what an angle that would be for the black man who is playing hockey. And it's not even a black man. He's just a remarkable player. And here he is in Russia, and I'd love to get him. Yes.
Before, I want to wrap up in a few minutes.
Absolutely.
Partly because I'd like to allow some of our students to have a chance to ask you one-on-one a couple of questions before
Absolutely.
you go.
Absolutely.
But I'll ask maybe one more question from the audience and make it the last, and then let you have a little bit of time with Saada before
What
she
was
goes.
your question that you had said, what are we supposed to ask? You're not going to tell?
I'm going to leave it to them because they have to pick up on it. And
Okay.
if they don't, well, we'll talk
We missed
about
it.
it later.
Okay, you have two there.
Right. My name is Jalan Nasher.
Hi.
I just wanted to know your opinion on the Afrocentric school that they just opened.
Yes, I'll tell you, it went both ways. When I first heard about it, I said, no, that just doesn't make any sense. Why are you going to have an Afrocentric school? And that was all based on my ignorance. I did not have enough information, and unfortunately, I was getting all my information from mainstream media, and when I could have just asked somebody, really. But as more and more news came out, what I noticed was I started to change my opinion of it. And I asked some women I knew, would you put your child in this school? Would you put your child in this school? And so many of them said, absolutely. It's groundbreaking. And if you think of Little Rock in terms of people who were going to be the first, they just wanted to be a part of that. What happened with that was Sway Magazine wanted me to do a piece on the head of the TDSB, Dr. Chris Spence, who was just appointed as the head of the Toronto District School Board. At the same time, I happened to know the woman who was going to be the principal of the Afrocentric school, Tando Hyman. And I said, I can get her for an interview. Let's get her for an interview. Why? Because Tando was I knew Tando growing up was part of Afrocentric programming. She took part in programs on weekends, and she was actually a product of Afrocentric teaching. And here was mainstream media using words, negative language like segregation and not inclusive, and saying things like, oh, we're going to use taxpayers' money to have this school. It's going to fail. Failure was a dominant theme. And so I said to the editor, we have to do a different angle. Let's get Tando to talk about being the principal of this school, but let's show that she is a product of that same teaching. Why? And we're not going to use any of that language. We're not going to talk about failure. We're going to talk about the parents who want their children to succeed and who are doing this for their children. And they took part in planning the curriculum for the Afrocentric school. And sure, it was an endeavor. Sure, it could possibly fail, but we let mainstream media focus on all the failing and the failing and the failings because they lacked the information. And Sway, I thought, was really gracious in allowing me to do the piece. And so my opinion now of the Afrocentric school, I love the idea. I'm looking forward to seeing it succeed, and I'm looking forward to seeing the first set of graduates from the school.
When was that published? So we just had this fall issue. It was the summer issue of Sway Magazine, summer issue. So if you go to if you go to swaymag.ca, you can click on, or you can actually do a Google search. It's much easier, I'm sorry. Just put Saada Branker and put Tando, Thando, Saada Branker, comma, Tando, and you would probably find it. Or Saada Branker, Afrocentric School, you'll find it directly. You can also go to the Sway site and look at it and see some of the articles. Go from there. Any other? I really thought you guys have good questions. Somebody has one. They have more, and I want to give them a couple of minutes, Andrew, when we wrap it up.
Yes, by all means.
Depending on your time. You okay?
I'm good. No, I'm good.
Okay.
Are you good?
I just want to thank you in a number of ways. One, the investment of time to prepare all this for us. It's fun for them to get a sense of how you prepare for something like this. Thanks for dropping all those wonderful hints about the things that journalists do, because they just think I'm crazy enough to keep banging away at
hearing
this.
it. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
it's nice to hear it from somebody outside. But even more important than all of that is your sense of interpreting the essence of celebrating Black history as inclusiveness. That to me is so important. It's what this school learned in the last month and a half as we extended our hearts and hands to our colleagues in College Boreal
Right, you were talking
over
about that.
the earthquake in Haiti. And I think
Yes, you mentioned.
we've begun the building process of that bridge to them and inclusiveness that you talked about. Thanks for reminding us.
Parfait. Merci bien. Merci. C'est un plaisir. Thank you very much. And my next piece for Sway Magazine is actually going to be focusing on Montrealers who are contributing to the relief and the support in Haiti, as well as Torontonians who are doing that. And I have to get that in tomorrow. So wish me well with that.
So she's going to
Thank
give you a little more time if you want one-on-one with her. Maybe give you 10 or 15 minutes before we wear her out. And then I'll meet you upstairs, those of you who would like to. Sorry.
Wonderful. I didn't mean to interrupt. But I also have my card here. If anybody wants to write me, please, I invite you to write me. It'd be great to have a dialogue. And my name's Saada in Swahili, roughly means help. And so I just remember what it was like when I was, trying to get through school and not sure, like, where do I go? By all means, if you're looking to get information, write me. It does take me a while to get back to people, but just identify yourselves, and I will try to, if I can't help you, I will find somebody else who can if you have questions. And so I will leave my card here, and we can keep in touch.
Great.
Thank you
all.
for your time. Thank you. Thank you.
And thanks to our folks from Broadcasting and Film for helping us out with the podcasting today, guys. Thank you. She's all
Okay.
yours.
Okay.